Why do Muslim leaders hate the Jewish people and the Jewish state so much? So much that they're willing to annihilate Jews. I'm going to tell you today, and I think it starts with a man named Mohammed.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
As the struggle continues in Israel with the Israeli forces fighting Muslim terrorists in the Gaza Strip, hundreds of casualties, many of them women and children in Gaza. The attention of the entire world through the media is focusing on the area, and certainly the focus of Muslim leaders, both Sunni and Shiite, are focused on this ongoing battle. The leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, made this statement recently in a speech to college students. He said, these crimes, what the Jews are doing as they fight in Gaza, these crimes which are beyond imagination and show the true nature of the wolfish and child killer regime, which the only solution is its destruction. However, until that time, he continued, the expansion of the armed resistance of the Palestinians of the West Bank is the only way to confront this wild regime. What I want to do today for you is to give you a framework in which you can see what's happening in the Middle East, in which you can understand the visceral hatred that Muslim leaders have of the Jews, and hopefully enable you to speak intelligently and to listen intelligently to the news, but also to speak intelligently to your friends, people at church, people that you work with, so that you can grasp the historic reasons why Muslim leaders hate the Jews so much. Now, before I get there, I've got to give you some critical news backdrop. Number one, Hamas recently said that they would welcome the help of Hezbollah in their struggle in the Gaza Strip. The Ayatollah said that we've got to arm the Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, you'll notice from this map that the West Bank is not touching, it's not adjacent to the Gaza Strip, all right? The Jews took the West Bank in its war with Jordan. The Jews took the Gaza Strip in its war with Egypt. Hamas inviting Hezbollah to help, at first blush for most people, seems like, oh, well, that's great, they're all Muslims. Hold on a second, you've got to understand. Hamas is Sunni, and Hezbollah is Shiite. Hezbollah means the party of God. Hamas means devotion to Allah in the path of jihad, or zeal on the path of Allah. So one would think, well, of course they're working together. Why wouldn't they work together? I want to explain this to you. And I know that for most of us, we don't have an interest in the narrative of the Muslim world because it seems like it's thousands of miles away, which it is. It's foreign to us, which it is. Its language is unintelligible to most of us, which it is. But number one, there are Christians dying, being persecuted in the Middle East. So we owe it to our Christian brothers and sisters to know what's going on. And number two, there is a growing, very large minority of Muslims in Europe that are involved in terrorist attacks and calling for jihad, funding jihad. There's a growing group of Muslims here in America. And when you understand the 1400-year history of Islam, and when you understand what happened in Muhammad's own lifetime, then you start to realize, wow, I ought to know what's going on with the Muslim world because it can impact me. All right. Why it's so significant. Now, if you've watched the show before, you know these answers, and if not, if you don't remember them, I'm going to teach it to you again. What is the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite? Can you remember? A Sunni is somebody who believes that anybody could be the successor of Muhammad, any human being. A Shiite, that's an abbreviation for Shia al-Ali, which means the party of Ali. A Shiite is someone who believes that it has to be a blood relative of Muhammad. Now, Ali was Muhammad's cousin, so he was a blood relative. Ali married Muhammad's daughter, Fatima, and therefore their offspring were the grandchildren of Muhammad. So the Shiites believe in a dynastic continuity of the caliph, the successor. All right, the word caliph means successor, like the kings of England or any number of nations, where a blood relative, a blood child, and if there is no child, then they look for cousins to take the throne. That's what the Shiites believe. And the Sunnis say no, anyone on the path could be a successor to Muhammad. So the first successor was Abu Bakr. He was a very bloody general. The second successor was Umar. All right, these are successors after the death of Muhammad. The third successor was Uthman, and the fourth was Ali. The Sunnis say, yeah, it could be Ali. Doesn't have to be a blood relative, but it's okay if it is. But the Shiites say, no, it has to have been Ali, and it has to be one of the blood relatives of Muhammad himself, or else it's not a legitimate ruler. The fighting began in the first generation. Assassinations, cold-blooded murders, hatred of Sunnis to Shiites, and it has continued to this day. So when Hamas, who is Sunni, says to Hezbollah, that is Shiite, we want you to help us, they've shed more of each other's blood than they've ever worked together to shed the blood of a common enemy. It's a big, big deal. I want to continue explaining the significance of this and the connection of this visceral hatred of the Jews to Muhammad himself, to two events in Muhammad's life that will send a chill down your spine.
Hey, everyone's been asking me, when's Unstoppable coming out on DVD? Well, it's here. And I have created my own deluxe signature version of Unstoppable that contains not only the movie, but over 5 hours of additional curriculum and study guides for your family. It's perfect for your homeschool, educational facility, small group Bible study, and family devotions. And I'm going to share with you some of the spiritual warfare that surrounded the release of this film. This box set also includes extended scenes, new music videos, the inside scoop on the whole Facebook controversy. So what are you waiting for? I made this special version with my family in mind, and I know your family will be blessed by it too. Unstoppable 2.0 Deluxe Signature Version, available only here at KurtCameron.com. I can't wait for you to experience what's inside.
As we look at what's going on in the Middle East and focus on the recently renewed threat from the leader of Iran that Israel should be destroyed, note the leader's name, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He named himself, or those who named him after Ali. He's a Shiite. The majority of the Muslims in Iran are Shiites, whereas the majority of Muslims in Palestine are Sunnis. And the recent self-proclamation of the new caliph, the leader of ISIS, that militant terrorist organization that has controlled parts of Syria, now is controlling parts of Baghdad and is murdering Christians, even as we speak. He named himself Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He chose the name Abu Bakr Abu Bakr, as I said in the last segment, was the first caliph, the first successor after Muhammad. So he's seeing this narrative and he's weaving himself into it. Now, there hasn't been a caliph since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, all right? And part of the agenda of any devout Muslim is to restore the caliphate, the successor. He says, I'm the guy, and I'm naming myself after the first successor, after Muhammad. Poetic on his part, in the Muslim sense, historic in the Muslim sense of the narrative. But you have to understand, for them to work together, for Hamas to say we are inviting Hezbollah is mind-boggling. And for the Ayatollah to say, let's arm the Palestinians in the West Bank, who are Sunnis, and help them fight the Jews. They hate the Jews so much. Why? I'm going to tell you. And by the way, one other thing. Iran just said that they developed missiles that can destroy the Israeli Iron Dome and take out the American Patriot defense system. And we all know that the Muslims are at this very moment in Iran on the verge of having nuclear weapons. So when the leader of a country says that the solution is the destruction of the Jewish nation, and they're on the edge of obtaining nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver them, that's the time when the Jewish leadership, with or without the United States of America's help, that's the time they really start to say, you know what? We might have to destroy those bunkers. We might have to destroy their ability to make those nuclear weapons, because if we don't, there might be a nuclear weapon that goes off in Tel Aviv. But I digress. So back to the historic issues and the backdrop of why the Muslims hate the Jews so much. There are two main reasons, and also why they feel total vindication in just annihilation, murder of Jews. It goes to Muhammad himself. When Muhammad began to announce that he was the next prophet after Christ and he was the final prophet, he went to the Jews and told them that he was who they were waiting for, all right? They wanted a Messiah. His understanding of Christian and Jewish theology was very warped, but he really believed that he was a successor to Moses for the Jewish mind, that he was the one that they were waiting for. And they refused to believe it. They said, no, you're not. And they mocked him. All right, they literally verbally mocked him. Some people would sing songs about him and spoke deridingly of him. And it really got under Muhammad's skin. So there's one reason. But the vindication of total wholesale murder goes to the life of Muhammad himself in an event where Muhammad oversaw the beheading of every adult male, hundreds of them, chopping off their heads, and then taking their wives and children as slaves. And Muhammad himself took one of the young women as his personal sex slave. I'm going to give you the details when we come back from this break. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. If you want to understand something, a philosophy, a religion, go to the primary sources. Read their own literature. Always remember that. When I started studying Islam, and then I went on to college and got a master's degree from a major military university called Norwich University. I got a master's degree in diplomacy and international terrorism. I did enormous, hundreds of hours of research on Islam. And never one time did I read a book against Islam. I thought, well, if I'm going to understand it, I need to understand it from their writings, their history, their theology, their revered records that they all study. So I'm talking about their leaders. So what I'm about to share with you is from their material, and it is highly revered. And they look at it as a great and awesome victory. And it's the foundation, part of the foundation that I discussed with you of why Muslims feel justified in visceral hatred of the Jews and in their annihilation. When Muhammad was alive, there was a group of Jews living in a city, and they were called the Banu Qurayza, the tribe of Qurayza. And there were hundreds and hundreds of Jewish families, and they formed a confederation with some of Muhammad's political enemies, which came to nothing, totally came to nothing. Muhammad was out quelling this little turbulence. The Jews never took up arms against him, but they sided with the people that were trying to stop the growth of Muhammad's political leadership. Muhammad was going home, and he said that the angel Gabriel showed up to him and, in effect, told him that he was sending Muhammad back to bring the judgment of God upon the Jews of Banu Qurayza. So Muhammad went, and the very long story short is the Jews were given the opportunity to either fight or to surrender and to submit to the judgment. Other Jews had done so and were allowed to emigrate, to leave the Arabian Peninsula and take with them what they could, but then all the houses and the product and the chattel goods that were left went into the hands of Muhammad and his followers. So they probably thought, well, this is what's going to happen to us. Muhammad picked a man named Saad to render the judgment, and he said, I give the judgment that their warriors should be killed and their children and women should be taken as prisoners. And then, the text says, the prophet then remarked, O Saad, you have judged among them with the judgment of the king, Allah. Another eyewitness account said, Muhammad said that you have judged them with the judgment of the seventh heaven. In other words, Muhammad said, this is what God wants. So what they did was they took all of the young boys to see if they had hit puberty. Stripped them naked, saw if they'd hit puberty. If they had hit puberty, they were beheaded. And the women and the children were then dispersed as slaves. But listen to what this historic record says, okay? This is really critical. Then the apostle went out to the market of Medina, which is still the market today, and dug trenches in it. Then he sent for them and struck off their heads in those trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. This went on until the apostle made an end to them. Among them was the enemy of Allah, Huya ben Aktub and Ka'ab, Asad their chief, and they were brought out with their hands bound to their neck by a rope. There were 600 or 700 in all, though some put the figure as high as 800 or 900. Notice, this is from Ibn Ishaq, Life of Muhammad. One of the most revered, if not the most revered history of the life of Muhammad. It says that the apostle went out. This all happened in Medina, by the way, which is where Muhammad lived and where he died. The apostle went out. The apostle dug trenches. He struck off their heads. So whether Muhammad was doing the chopping or whether he was ordering the chopping or it was a mixture of both, he's got his hands in it. His hands are covered with blood. And he literally, brutally annihilated every single Jew. They dug trenches. It looks and feels like World War II, the Holocaust. They dug trenches, had the men kneel over the trenches, cut off their heads, and then push their bodies into the trenches. Can you imagine the blood? Can you imagine the stench? The horror? That is why Muslims today feel totally justified in annihilating them. Because that's what Muhammad did. And then this is what the Quran says about that event. And he brought those people of the book, that's the Jews, who supported them, that little cabal I was telling you about. He brought those people of the book who supported them from their fortresses and cast terror into their hearts. Some of them you slew, and some you took prisoners. And he made you heirs of their lands, their houses, and their goods, and of a land which you had not frequented. And Allah has power over all things. So the Quran, which is the word of God to Muslims, inspired by God himself, the very words of God, God says this was a great miracle. Some of them you slew, that was the men, they chopped off their heads, and the teenage boys. Some of them you took prisoners, and God gave you their houses. So the Muslim reading this says, man, if it's good enough for Muhammad, it's good enough for me. What would Muhammad do? What did he do? That's what I want to do. And oh, by the way, he took one young lady, Rehana, and made her his sex slave. And she was with him as his concubine until the day he died. That's what we're dealing with Islam, people. When we come back, I'm going to tell you one other story which shows the root of their hatred for the Jews. My wife and I, for 5 years, have been grinding our own wheat and baking our own bread from scratch. Within 2 hours, you can have fresh wheat in your hand and then piping hot bread come out of the oven. The most nutritious and delicious bread you will ever have. And we do it for under $1 a loaf. Call Paulas Bread and find out about this grain mill and the mixer and how it can save you money and change your life. We have put together what we call an online university for you. Now that's a highfalutin way of saying that we have a pretty significant library of material, books, tapes, videos that are there for you for free. Why are we doing this? Because America is desperate for new leaders, and because this material could help you to become the leader that you and God want you to be. Check it out and enjoy it. It is better to have an ambitious plan than none at all. Sir Winston Churchill. The Jews in the Arabian Peninsula were scattered around, and some of them were in a place called Khaybar. And one of their leaders was named Kenina. He was a treasurer. And the Muslims came in and wanted their money, and Kenina wouldn't give it up. One of the Jews betrayed where the money was, and he said, I'm not telling you. And Muhammad said, look, we're going to excavate it. If we find it, we're going to kill you. So they went and they found some of it. Then they tied him down, and they built a fire on his chest, okay? Brought him right to the point of death to try and get him to talk. And then finally Muhammad ordered his head cut off. Well, he was a newlywed, had a beautiful 17-year-old daughter. Her name, or rather what? He had a beautiful 17-year-old wife named Safiya. By all accounts, she was just drop-dead beautiful, 17 years old. Bodies strewn everywhere. Her husband had just been killed. Her father had been killed. Other extended family members dead. And Muhammad frees her and makes her his wife. And that night goes and has sexual relations with her. A 17-year-old, he's almost 60 at this point, around 60 years old, has just murdered her husband. And he takes her as his wife. Okay? This is what we're dealing with. And this is why the Muslim leaders feel that it is their right to hate the Jews and to annihilate them, because they're following the footsteps of Muhammad.